Can Dillon Gabriel work himself into the Heisman conversation? We'll discuss that and much more on today's episode of Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to Locked On Sooners, and thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Shout out to all the everydayers, every member of the Everyday Club for making Locked On Sooners that first listen. I'm John Williams. You can follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. He's Josh Helmer. You can follow him on Twitter at JoshOnRef. You can also hear him Monday through Friday from 9 to noon on 94.7 The Ref in Norman. And Josh, if you're wondering why I'm so red, it's because I spent 3 hours putting together a trampoline for the kids today. Nobody warned me that it would take so long to put together a trampoline, and I am furious with all of you. But away from that, Josh, we got some Twitter questions we're going to answer today on the episode, and let's get started with this one. We're going to ask, what is the ceiling and what is the floor for Dillon Gabriel in the 2023 season?
Well, first off, my condolences on the trampoline project. You survived it, though. The trampoline is put together.
So it is, and it works quite well. The kids loved it until we made them come inside because the thunder was rolling across the plains of Oklahoma today.
Okay, well, that's good. So you got a little sunburn. It was a time extensive project, but
yes.
Job well done, Dad.
It's going to be great. We're going to have a great summer with it, but 3 hours of my life was spent putting that thing together.
And you never get it back, my friend. But hey, it's all about the memories.
That's right.
The ceiling and the floor. Well, the floor, let's start there. I think the floor for Dillon Gabriel to me is similar to what you got a season ago, which and probably mix in a couple more interceptions, right? I mean, really, he was pretty good. For any complaints that somebody would have about Dillon Gabriel, the one area that Gabriel was good was taking care of the football for the most part. I know he missed a couple of games or at least a game and a half because of the hit that he took in the TCU game. But 3,200 yards, 25 touchdowns or so, and let's say 8 and above or 8 or fewer interceptions, right? Right there at that 8 number, give or take one, the opposite direction. Either way, that's probably the floor. And then you get into the floor. What does it mean in terms of wins or losses? I don't think that's all dependent on Dillon Gabriel, though he clearly, to me, John, can be better in key moments for Oklahoma, as we've spent a lot of time discussing over the past, ever since last season ended with Dillon Gabriel. The ceiling is he's better than a year ago. This wide receiving core that we have questions about, that everything clicks, it comes together. Jalil Farouk turns into, the next lead wide receiver at Oklahoma, to where he's a high NFL draft pick, and you find wide receivers up and down here to fill out 2, 3, 4, 5 in terms of your top wide receivers. And Dillon Gabriel throws for 3,700 yards or 3,750 and 35 touchdowns. And Oklahoma is a Big 12 championship contender. And if all of those things happen, then his ceiling can coincide, yes, with being a Heisman Trophy finalist and contender. I'm looking at the odds from FanDuel, and he's 40-1 right now. Dillon Gabriel is to win the Heisman. So he's, just ballparking here without actually counting every single player down. He's about 20th or so on the board. So he's not one of the favorites to win the Heisman Trophy. I don't expect him to win the Heisman Trophy, John, but that would be the absolute ceiling, is Big 12 championship, winning quarterback, Heisman contending quarterback, and taking Oklahoma to a college football playoff berth, all the while throwing for, maybe 500 more yards than he did a season ago.
Yeah, I think we just look back at Dillon Gabriel's career. Arguably his best season so far has been the 2020 season, where he played 10 games in the COVID shortened season. He only completed 60% of his passes that year, but he had a 32-4 touchdown to interception ratio. He threw for more yards, 3,500 yards, than he did in 12 games with the Sooners this past year. And arguably was still just as effective. He was a little bit more effective as a rusher with Oklahoma last season than he ever was at UCF. So I do think like the floor, I mean, to me, I would be disappointed if he didn't throw, let's say didn't complete like 63% of his passes. He completed just over 62% last year. Didn't throw for more than 3,000 yards and didn't have like a 3-1 touchdown to interception ratio. I'd prefer to see that go to 4-1, where he's looking at, 32 touchdowns, no more than 8 interceptions. Because that's kind of what Jeff Lebby's offense, honestly, is not going to put him in a lot of situations where he's having to throw into tight windows. We see what Jeff Lebby's offense is. It's an offense predicated on getting guys open, throwing kind of conservative balls in the, short to intermediate behind the line of scrimmage, or, just chucking it deep, which again are going to be, high risk, sometimes high reward, but generally you're throwing that go route and either your receiver's catching it or nobody's catching it. At the same time, when he threw that one into the wind during the spring game, Peyton Bowen came down with the ball. So that's kind of where I see the floor for him. He's got to have a productive season for Oklahoma to be successful. It's not all on the quarterback. If you followed me on Twitter for very long, you understand that quarterback wins are not a stat. The quarterback, yes, they get the most blame, they get the most accolades, but it takes a whole football team for a team to be successful. The quarterback may carry the biggest share of that, success on their plate, but it's not all on the quarterback. They were good enough to win more games than they did a year ago. Obviously, the defense was a big issue and why they didn't win. But as you mentioned, Josh, efficiency, clutch situations, those got to improve for Dillon Gabriel. I do think that he could put himself into the Heisman conversation again with the schedule that they have. I mean, if the teams on the schedule aren't as good as we think they're going to be, he's going to have a chance to rack up some yards. At the same time, the running game is going to be so prevalent for the Sooners that maybe he doesn't have a 4,000 yard season. And, especially if they're an improved defense, he's not going to have to throw for a ton of yards like Kyler Murray did or Baker did, or, Jalen Hurts throwing for over 3,000, rushing for 1,000. If the defense is better, then he's not going to have to throw for a ton. I do think that he could be in the conversation, but again, I don't think that he's going to win a Heisman. To me, the ceiling is a Big 12 title and potentially, putting them in the conversation for the college football playoff. But given the strength of schedule or the lack thereof, I think a one-loss Oklahoma team could potentially be out of the college football playoff discussion if there are several top one-loss teams like Clemson, Bama, Georgia, Ohio State or Michigan, USC, something of that nature. Then I think Oklahoma might get knocked a little bit because of the lack of strength of schedule. That said, I mean, if things come together defensively, this is going to be a team that's going to be one of the better teams in the country because their offense is good enough to win a lot of football games.
So just thinking strictly statistically again, his career best was his first season in terms of just yardage, 3,653 in that 2019 season with UCF. Obviously, 2020, how many games did they play in 2020? 10. So his numbers are going to be a little bit lower that year at UCF. I'm going to go ahead and say that he can sniff 4,000. I more than the 500 that I said. He can go north of, if things like, if we're talking ceiling, he missed 6 quarters a season ago. I mean, you're talking about the entirety of the Texas game. Well, actually more than that. Like 2.5 quarters versus TCU. And, oh, by the way, Oklahoma just offensively in some key moments didn't sustain drives where maybe they could have sustained drives. So I think there's just in terms of a yardage standpoint, a decent amount that Dillon Gabriel still has left potentially on the table at Oklahoma. Obviously, if we're talking about just team goals, if you get like 37-50, John, 35 touchdowns, and just sort of stay who you've been in terms of the interceptions department, he's never thrown more than 7 interceptions in a season. So he's historically been somebody that, again, takes care of the football. So I don't think it's crazy to say that he could be a 37, 50, or maybe even north approaching 4,000 yards guy and kind of right in that, 35 touchdowns, 6, 7 interceptions. And then, oh, by the way, you coincide that with Oklahoma's defense improving and Oklahoma being a Big 12 champion. I mean, that's the ceiling college football playoff berth. We'll see.
Yeah, there's a lot still to be figured out on Oklahoma's offense. The offensive line has still got question marks. The wide receiver core has still got question marks. We talked about that a lot earlier in the week on one of our previous episodes this week, so go check that out. Josh, we got more Twitter questions coming at you. We'll answer those. We'll also talk about a wide receiver that looked like he was heading to Oklahoma and pivoted and went another direction. But first, let me talk to y'all about Built Bar. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar ever. If you haven't tried it, you're missing out. It tastes great. It's great for you. Low carb, low calorie, low sugar, very high in protein. And they've got great flavors from the peanut butter brownie. The cookies and cream is fantastic. Go check it out, built.com. Use promo code LOCK15. Get 15% off your next order over at built.com. You can check it out at Sam's or Walmart as well. They might have them in stock for you over there. So, Josh, our next question is going to be a two-parter again. This one is going to be about which returning football player on offense and defense makes the biggest jump. And this is from our buddy Cornell Woolridge over there on Twitter at Renaissance XM. Start with offense.
I think Gavin Sawchuk will make the biggest jump offensively.
I think
he's gonna be a star in the backfield. I think he will. He will. And yes, you did choose. You chose well. I mean, that's like, we didn't plan this, by the way, people. But yeah, I think Sawchuk is going to finish as Oklahoma's leading rusher. I think by years in, people are going to be talking about, oh, can this kid be Oklahoma's next great running back? So I would say Sawchuk for me, offensively for Oklahoma. And then defensively, I think it's easy. It's Dasan McCullough. It's the man that is coming in with all these lofty freshman All-American expectations upon him. And the spring game showed me, yeah, he's going to meet those freshman All-American expectations and then deliver beyond those, just based on that small glimpse we got to see. I think he is absolutely, alongside Danny Stutzman, going to be one of the stars of Oklahoma's revamped, improved overnight defense.
Yeah, I like your choices. I did think of Gavin Sawchuk whenever I was putting this question together, because that's one of the players that we didn't see a lot of in 2022, but has the juice to be able to make big plays, whether it's in a passing game or as a runner. We saw in the spring game that, even though he didn't rush for a lot of yards, just getting the ball in his hands is going to be a recipe for success for the Oklahoma Sooners offense. It's a really, really good choice. For me, I mean, I know I keep going back to Jalil Farouk all the time, so I'm going to go a different direction on that one. And I'm going to go with Gavin Freeman. I think, Drake Stoops is the starter in the slot. We're going to see a lot of him, but I do think Gavin Freeman showed in the spring game that he's ready for a heavy workload in the offense, and they're going to utilize him. I mean, they rotate their wide receivers. I mean, they're not rotating them at the same rate that Lincoln Riley did and, Dennis Simmons did, but they're going to use their wide receivers and they're going to get them out there a little bit. And so I think we're going to see Gavin Freeman go from just kind of, spot gadget guy to getting a maybe 25, 30% snap share. But I think he's going to be impactful in that because, again, in the very few snaps that we saw him play in 2022, he was an impactful player. And it's going to set you up for life without Drake Stoops. And so you're going to start getting him more involved in the offense because you want to get him ready to be a significant player for you. The other one, wide receiver, again, Brennan Thompson. I know, we'll talk about another wide receiver we thought was coming to Oklahoma, but Brennan Thompson, the kid has got so much speed. It's kind of crazy that Texas didn't really utilize him much last year. And he's a dynamic player when he gets the ball in his hands. You don't have to do a lot. Just throw him a screen here and there and just make something. Let him see if he can make something happen. Because every once in a while, something will pop and he'll make a big play, or run a gadget, run a reverse with him just to see if you can just pop something. And I think Jeff Lebby will. I think Jeff Lebby is going to utilize that speed. He's going to get him involved, try and get him up to speed fast, and see if he can take on kind of similar maybe to Gavin Freeman workload from a year ago, but maybe even a little bit more than that, because they do still have questions at wide receiver too. And this is a guy that has enough speed that can make an and immediate impact, especially if nobody else kind of asserts themselves in the wide receiver department. Defensively, speaking of speed, let's go with R. Mason Thomas. This is the guy that is easy to forget about sometimes because he was a 3-star and just kind of came on Oklahoma's radar in the final month of the 2022 recruiting cycle, and flipped from Iowa State to Oklahoma. And then we saw him, in flashes. We saw him, get opportunities a little bit here and there. Had a few offsides penalties that were kind of, head scratching, but you're like, it's freshman mistake. It's going to happen. But I do think that this year is going to be a year where he starts taking that step to being Oklahoma's next great pass rusher. I know you got Adepoju Adebawore. I know you got, some other guys that you feel really good about, coming in the pipeline, or you feel great about Ronald Bothroyd. I feel great about him, but what R. Mason Thomas does off the edge with his speed is something that we don't really have anywhere else on the roster right now. So you need him to take a step, but I think that because of the juice that he has, the get off that he has, the kind of tenaciousness that he plays with, and the athleticism and the agility that he plays with, he's going to really wreak havoc on opposing offensive tackles. They're not going to really have the skill set to keep up with him week to week because of just the way he rushes the passer and how quick he is off the line of scrimmage. That's just going to cause so many people fits. He's only a true sophomore, so he's still got a lot of room to improve, but it wouldn't surprise me to see him have like a 5-sack season this year in kind of a part-time still role, and maybe down the stretch start to emerge as one of Oklahoma's better defensive players, getting ready for a move to the SEC where he's going to be heavily relied upon to be a great pass rusher. And I do think he's on that trajectory. It's still early in his career, but you see the traits, and the traits jump off the page. If he can continue to work, which everybody in the room says he's one of the hardest workers in the room, Miguel Chavis, different defensive leaders you talk to, he's one of the hardest workers. He puts the work in. So there's no doubt in my mind he's going to continue to ascend.
Well, and, it's easy to offensively go with a Sawchuk or a Freeman, but I would just also say this, skill guys aside, quarterback aside, running backs, it just folks are going to touch the football aside. I'm hoping that we're talking about some interior offensive line guys making big time jumps, whether that's Rame or Anderson inside, if that's a Savion Byrd who did some nice things in the Cheez-It Bowl, if that's Jake Taylor, right? I mean, if it's, whoever that is, some offensive linemen, I know that those won't be the noticeable jumps because it won't be Sawchuk racing 60 yards into the end zone. It'll be because those guys paved the way. So it's, less noticeable, but a Tyler Guyton just everywhere across the offensive line. It's, again, that's probably going to be the jump that's most important, at least offensively, for this team, is those guys up front.
Yeah, absolutely. The offensive line has to be at least as good as it was a year ago, but probably it needs to be better if they're going to take a step into the Big 12 title game and win. Texas's defense is getting better. It's improving, and they've got a defensive front that caused Oklahoma a lot of problems last year. The interior offensive line's got to be better. Andrew Rame, he's got to kind of take that step. He's been good, but he needs to start asserting himself as one of the great players along that offensive line. We feel good about Tyler Guyton. I think we feel good about Walter Rouse, but yeah, that interior has got to come together and it's got to gel. Josh, we got one more question here on the Twitter side of things. This one comes from Shortstop at Shortstop0101. He asks, buy stock in Justin Harrington? Yes or no?
I'm perennially buying stock in Justin Harrington. I'm old school buying stock in Justin Harrington. But the reason I'm going to double or triple down here with Justin Harrington is because Coach Venables tells me I need to be buying stock in Justin Harrington. And I don't think Coach Venables, here's somebody that, maybe this isn't the right way to phrase this, John, but kind of came crawling back to the University of Oklahoma, admitting, hey, it might have been a mistake that I tried to leave here. And again, crawling back and had to fight and scratch and claw into the good graces of one Brent Venables, and has done so. Everything you hear is that they love what they see. He obviously had himself a nice spring game, and all throughout the spring, it was, hey, Justin Harrington's out there flying around making plays. So I do think for me, Dasan McCullough will be the starting cheetah, but somehow, some way, if it's just that he's going to get a bunch of those cheetah snaps when they move McCullough around, or McCullough's going to have a breather every now and again, Harrington, yes, will play, I think, significant snaps for this football team.
And I would love to see the two cheetah alignment where you're operating in a sort of a 3-4 base, against two tight ends. If the other team's running like a 12 personnel, 13 personnel, 23, something like that. Not a 23. Yeah. 12 or 13, maybe a 23. That does work out. That the math does work there. And you can have Dasan McCullough and a Justin Harrington on the field at the same time. And then you've got two guys that are both athletic, can both cover, can both rush the passer a little bit, especially Dasan McCullough. And then it creates a little bit more confusion. Now, we don't see a lot of pro style run heavy type formations in college football anymore. A lot of it's 11, it's 3 wide receivers or more, but you will see it some. You'll see it against BYU probably. You'll see it if you do play, Kansas State. They run a little bit more traditional 2 tight end stuff a lot of times. Still, they'll run the 11. They'll run the 4 wide receiver sets as well. But those are opportunities where you might be able to see, both cheetahs on the field at the same time with Jaren Kanak, with Danny Stutzman, just giving you a lot of athleticism and speed. And then even if you're in kind of a nickel, quote unquote, a nickel alignment, and you have, 3 rushers, 3 linebackers plus a Harrington and McCullough as one of your kind of slot players, then you've got a lot of options. And it wouldn't surprise me to see them put them both on the field at some point in certain matchups and against certain players. Obviously, if you're playing, a bunch of fast wide receivers, you may not want all, both those guys on the field at the same time. But if you're playing teams that maybe don't have a ton of team speed, you might be able to get away with it because it's going to help you still be really good against the run and be good in coverage as well. So yeah, I'm buying stock. Everybody's telling me to buy stock. Brent Venables is telling me to do so. He looked really good in the spring game, in addition to Dasan. And this is, again, year 2 for a guy that's been around, been in the system a little bit, has more familiarity with the defense, and should take off, should see his stock ascend in 2023. Last thing we're going to talk about on today's show, Josh, is the wide receiver situation with Jordyn Tyson. Jordyn Tyson, our man Colin Kennedy over at Sooners Illustrated felt pretty strongly that he was going to be heading to the Oklahoma Sooners, issued a crystal ball. And after a visit to Arizona State, things shifted quickly for Mr. Tyson, commits to the Sun Devils. Bummer. But again, it was going to be one of those situations where he was going to have to come in and compete with a bunch of dudes and find a role offensively.
Yeah, this I guess qualifies as a little bit of a surprise just because we saw Colin Kennedy toss out the crystal ball. It's a bummer because here you had a chance to supplement the wide receiver room with somebody that we've already seen go make plays for a not very good Colorado team, John. I mean, he was about to Jordyn Tyson come into Oklahoma even though this is a 6-7 football team here a season ago, a much, much better offensive talent situation, much better quarterback situation. The opportunity for Jordyn Tyson to burst onto the scene nationally was right here and available at Oklahoma. And Oklahoma seemingly needs help. So it seemed like a match made in heaven. Wish him well. I don't know that he made the right choice for himself long-term. We'll see how it plays out. I think if Oklahoma wanted you, you probably should have come to the University of Oklahoma right now.
I mean, we're always going to say that, but Arizona State is an intriguing team. They landed Jaden Rashada after he requested his release from his signing with the Florida Gators. So that was a big time pickup for the Sun Devils. But again, how long is it going to take for him to be ready to see the field? And will Jordyn Tyson be able to take advantage of that, of a quarterback as talented as Jaden Rashada? We'll see. Still, for Oklahoma, you got a bunch of guys that you feel solid about. We'll see which one emerges to take a role. You got Angelo Anthony out of the portal. We got Brennan Thompson, who we talked about earlier. You got JJ Hester. You got LV Buckley Shelton. You got Jaden Gibson, Nick Anderson. I mean, a bunch of guys. And then you got Jaquays Petaway coming in during the summer, who's another wide receiver who could really burst onto the scene and make a significant impact in year 1 with the Sooners. It's just a matter of, okay, who's gonna take advantage of the competition and really assert themselves as the second outside wide receiver across from Jalil Farouk? But we'll find those questions out here in a few months. I mean, we're still just about 4 months away from the start of the college football season, but make sure to be locked in with Locked On Sooners every single day. He's Josh Helmer. You can follow him on Twitter at JoshOnRef. You can also hear him Monday through Friday from 9 to noon on 94.7 The Ref in Norman. I'm John Williams. You can follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. The show is at Locked On Sooners. Make sure you're subscribed to the show wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. And until next time, Boomer Sooner.